Doubts about investing can strike you anytime. Switch to Mint. Now with Doubts about investing can strike you anytime. Switch to Mint. Now with Mint Money.
So good evening, friends, and a very hearty welcome to all of you who have taken the trouble of coming to the speakers for this roundtable on realizing the potential of the new global workforce. I think all of us would recall, I think except for the youngsters perhaps, how we used to receive resumes in a paper format. I mean, I was just trying to think about, I was talking to some of the CHROs out here, and they said, yeah, papers, perhaps I was discussing, I said, is it that only maybe the government officials are using the paper format of resumes? But they said, no. Even the governments are, perhaps for the blue-collar workers, they might be using it, but not for the white-collar workers. So a lot has changed as far as the entire recruitment sector is concerned. So today, you have, I mean, say somewhere in the 2000s, you had the online portals, and we had job recruitment online firms like Jobs Ahead, Monster, Naukri. And that was a very interesting phase where we thought that analytics was being built, and where a lot of resumes could be searched upon, where employers could look at potential recruits, recruits could look at potential employers, and you had a whole database out there. But even that was not to be. The world was to get more complex. And so today, you can recruit anybody from practically anywhere. So you could look at a LinkedIn profile, you could look at Facebook, you could look at Twitter, you could find your advertising recruit on YouTube perhaps, maybe look at an Instagram, maybe look at Snapchat. You don't know where you're going to get your next recruit from. But as we look at recruitment, along with the recruitment measures that HR professionals take, there's also the entire other challenges that we have of retaining good talent. There's an added challenge of weeding out non-performers, and that as humanely as possible, else they would be picked up by social networks. There would be this whole point of rewarding the good performers. And another big challenge would be that of global transparent compensation packages. Workforces have become global across geographies. HR policies have to be streamlined. And I guess however competent any HR professional be, at the end of the day, they would require a lot of analytical tools. Many of you here actually do use a lot of HR technology tools. But is there any kind of a unified talent management system? Maybe there's a need for these kind of seamless services that operate on the cloud. There is Adam Miller, who's the global CEO of Cornerstone On Demand, is one such company that talks about it. There are, of course, other companies. There's SAP, there's Oracle. There are many other companies, and you'll have many other options. Many of these offerings are kind of modular. Many of these kind of offerings offer everything as a unified package. Now, whether these kind of things, whether technology is going to be an enabler, to what extent can HR professionals use technology and make their life simpler and more rewarding for employees is something that we want to discuss out here. Adam Miller has been a globetrotter. He has grown his own company into a company that has got a market cap of about $2 billion, Adam, if you can correct me on that, and about 1,600 employees globally. And I remember, talking to him, and he says that he eats his own dog food. In other words, that he tests out each and every kind of tool that is there in his company, sees how productive it is, and then sort of preaches to the rest of the world. So now, without much ado, I will call Adam to give a presentation, after which I hope to have a free-flowing, interactive discussion with you all. Thank you.
So I started Cornerstone in 1999. Imagine the world in 1999. There was no cloud computing. There were no smartphones. I was in India 20 years ago, not 16 years ago, in Delhi. So I don't know what happened 4 years after I was here, but 20 years ago, this was a very, very different place. And there were no talk of big data. There was no talk of technology advances. There was no social media. There was no LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter. The world was a completely different place. And in that world, there were companies with tools to manage things around their people. There were tools to pay people. There were tools to ensure that they had the benefits and perks that they needed. There were tools to ensure that people were getting trained. Some of those tools were Microsoft Excel or pencil and paper, but there were ways to do all of these things. And when I started the company, there was a real desire for people, as is true today, and as has been true for many, many, many years, for organizations to identify high potential people and either bring them into the organization or cultivate them in the organization, to develop those people to take more responsibility, and to try to retain those people. This has basically been the way companies operate for a very long time. But everything changed over the last 15 years. So when I started, HR technology was really about automating process. It was about figuring out an easier way to ensure that new joiners were getting trained to do their job. Figuring out a way to ensure that compliance requirements were being met. Figuring out a way to get all the performance reviews done for all of the employees. Or to have tools to allocate bonuses or increases throughout the year to pay people. And as cloud computing came about, it became apparent that the way you would automate these processes wouldn't just be with software, but it would be with cloud software. Why? Because it was more flexible to use, it was cheaper to deploy, and it was easier to use. So you had this expectation that these processes would be automated. And so there came a best practice, which was to use cloud tools, software as a service, to automate these different processes. And so all those processes were siloed. There were people in charge of learning, of training and development. And those people around the world were buying systems that were built to do training and development. There were people responsible for organizational capability. And those people were managing the performance process and managing sometimes the rewards process. Often different people would manage succession, and they were responsible for finding tools that were built just to do those things. And separately, there were people that were responsible for recruiting. And so there were tools that emerged to let people recruit. And in the early 2000s, you had a number of companies doing these different things. And so it was a little bit unclear if the silos started with the company or the silos started with the tools, but you ended up with very siloed operations. And so best practice was to find the best-in-class tool in each of those silos. And so I was at an IT services company today in Delhi, and we had a debate about what it meant to find best of breed. Because back in 2007, 2008, to have best of breed meant you had the best learning system you could find, you had the best performance system you could find, and you had the best recruiting system you could find. And sometimes even have a different compensation system or a different system for onboarding. That was the top of the chain anywhere in the world. And there emerged leaders in each of those different categories. And so this company was very proud of the fact that 7 years ago, They had the best tools in each of those categories, and they were all cloud-based. That was state of the art. But something happened 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we all started to get smartphones. Now, a lot more of them here in India than in the US or Europe. Not quite as many, we think, as in China, but nobody's sure. And we started to see a transformation take place, a transformation where people started to expect that technology wasn't only going to be useful, technology was also going to be beautiful. That technology was going to be really easy to use. And nobody got the user manual to create a Facebook account. Nobody ever read the user guide to use Twitter. And suddenly, people's expectations about how software should work, how technology worked, completely changed. And so 3 years ago, 4 years ago, they would go into work, and some of these people were young people who went for the first time for their job. They already had been using their smartphone. They already knew how to use all these applications. They already were able to get a car in 2 minutes by clicking a button on their phone. And they saw the tools that were available at work. And they said, what is this garbage? Why does this work and look so much worse than what I can do at home? Why is there such a big difference? Why can't those tools be as easy to use and as elegant as what I have? And a shift started to happen. The shift was that when we were automating process, it was all about the company getting the employees to do things. And so the software that was built, the tools that were bought, were all to help the company automate their processes. But in this new world, where everybody had the computer in their pocket, and people were expecting things to be really easy to use, and you could search and get the answer for anything you could possibly think of in 3 seconds or less, became a world where the user was at the center. The user was in charge. And at work, that meant the employee was at the center. And so all these companies that had invested millions or tens of millions in systems of record realized we need systems of engagement. We need to put the user in the center. We need a unified way of managing talent, because talent is not about one thing at a time, right? We're all people. We get trained, we get assessed, we have feedback, we get conversations, we get paid, we may or may not get raises, we may or may not get promoted. But all those things are happening to us as one person. And so if you're a manager, you're doing all those things with your employees as one person. Not one day I only do learning, and another day I only do performance, and another day I only manage comp or recruiting. And so suddenly, the user was in charge, and all of the tools that were built flipped on their head. And best of breed, that was best of breed in 2007. And this is what I said to this CHRO. I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, 7 years ago, even 5 years ago, you guys were an 8 or a 9 because you had the best learning system, you had the best performance system, and you had the best recruiting system, and you had it all done as software as a service, and it was all up and running. But in 2015, you're not an 8 or a 9 anymore, you're a 3. Why? Because the world's about unified experience, unified talent management, right? A single place where all these things are integrated together. But the world's not stopping there, because the technology hasn't stopped. Because of cloud computing, because of mobile devices, there's been an ability for certain companies in the world, like Cornerstone, to collect an enormous amount of data. We've been collecting data over the last 10 years across thousands of companies. We today have 20 million users in 191 countries, using the system in 42 languages. And that means over the last decade, we've collected an enormous amount of data. And with modern technology, like database clustering, and machine learning. You're able to do incredible things with this data, to garner insights with this data. And so what we're working on today is not what would make you a 10 in talent management, having a unified solution, having unified processes, having global governance in talent management today. What we're working on is what's going to make you a 10 in 2020, when the world shifts from being about user engagement to being about data-driven decision making. And that's coming. That's coming in the next 5 years. And that's the reason that every large cloud computing company has made an acquisition of a machine learning company within the last 24 months. Why? Because they've amassed an enormous amount of data and understand what's happening in the future. They're preparing for what's coming next. And HR professionals need to start thinking about what is their role in this new world? What is their role in a world where it's not about managing transactions or reducing the cost of payroll by payroll processing by 2% or improving some process by 15%. It's about having more productive, more engaged, more skilled employees through systems of engagement. And it's about leveraging the data that's produced through those systems to make more effective decisions about the organization and about the people. In essence, helping companies have their people realize their potential. And that's what the future holds, and hopefully we'll be able to talk more about it today. Thank you.
By asking Adam. Adam, you spoke about why the importance of having a unified way of managing talent, and that's exactly what companies like yours speak about solutions. But since you speak to a lot of HR heads around the globe, perhaps you could highlight what are the kind of challenges that they face and what are the kind of obstacles to the adoption of a unified kind of system, because I'm sure when speaking to them, you may have said it, but are they really agreeable? Maybe in principle perhaps, but there could be certain bottlenecks in adopting these kind of technologies, a unified system.
Well, it's a good question because there are significant differences that we see around the world. So the US often likes to pride itself on being at the cutting edge of technology. And the companies, your peers in America often think that they're following best practices, they're setting the standards for what's happening. But in fact, because many of these companies have these systems in silos, and they have their organization set up in silos, they're actually